we've got a very distinguished panel of guests with us. So let me introduce you. We've got, firstly, Jan Stewart, who probably most of you will know if you're in the aged care not-for-profit sector. She's the CEO of Lottery West. She's also sat on, you know, a long list of boards as well. International boards, the Asia Pacific Lottery Association, World Lottery Association, the Governing Council of Hale School. She's a member of the Notre Dame University Advisory Board in Not-for-Profit Studies and the National Save the Children Fund Board. So let's please welcome Jan Stewart. We're very lucky to have with us during this very busy time, I'm sure, for her, the Honourable Helen Morton. Helen Morton was elected as an upper house member for the East Metropolitan Region in 2005. And after 5 probably very hard years of work, she was elected as the Minister for Mental Health and Disability. That was a new minister position that was actually very much a part of your hard work in actually setting up mental health as a key issue within the government. So please welcome the Honourable Helen Morton. We've also got Matt Rutter. Matt Rutter is the Director of Volunteering WA, the peak body for volunteerism in WA, and since 2008 has actually, or 2009 been the chairman?
2009.
2009 yep. Been the chairman. He's also a director on the Grain Trade Australia, Australia's peak grain body, and the Australian Grain Exporters Association, and is a director and treasurer for Volunteering Australia. He's also been the previous chairman of the Rottnest Channel Swim Association, so brings a vast knowledge of sitting on many different boards. Please welcome Matt Rutter. So, we've got 45 minutes, and I'd really just maybe like to share with you, well, if you could share with us, maybe just introducing what got you involved in different boards. What was your interest initially in getting involved in the boards? And maybe I'll start with you, Matt, because I know that, you know, you've been someone who's got involved in volunteerism and then really discovered the passion for volunteering as part of that journey. Yeah. Did you want to just share with us that journey?
Yeah, sure. So I, as Alicia said, I got onto the board of Volunteering WA in 2008 after a number of years in seclusion after the birth of my 2 children, which monopolised my time for a number of years. Prior to that, I was involved in the Rottnest Channel Swim Association, which was my first not-for-profit board position, if you like, or it was a committee but incorporated entity. And at the time, after the birth of my children, I was really, I guess, having children puts a new perspective on life, and started to think about how I might be able to contribute back to the community and society. And as luck would have it, a very good friend of mine was on the board of Volunteering WA and said that there was an opening there. I didn't know a lot about the organisation, but when I looked into it, it was clearly a very impressive and important organisation that was going places. It was going through a period of change with a new CEO, and I felt that with my experience, so my day job is in senior management and now at an executive level within a commodity trading business. And I felt that with my corporate experience as well as just my general passion, that I might be able to make a contribution to that organisation. And since getting on that board, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had, really, because meeting incredibly inspirational people within volunteering and all different sectors of the community, all of our member organisations, and just people who want to do good. And I think that's where, you know, that was the interest in taking part on this forum. Was ultimately we're talking about, you know, looking after the next generation and securing the future for our families and the community. And aged care is going to be a very big issue as we move forward, and we need to make sure that we've got the right leaders coming through the ranks.
Fantastic. Helen, politics is a way of contributing to your community, very similar to sitting on a not-for-profit board. What's piqued your interest in getting more involved in, making an impact in your community?
Thanks, Alyssa. I guess my real interest was the thing that drove me into politics anyway was about trying to reform mental health services in the way that as a community we looked at mental illness and a sort of like a significant increase and not really being properly recognised and concerns about that. So that was the reason that I went into politics. But in terms of having been there, some of the interesting situations that impact on today's events. One of the things that I'm responsible for is a ministerial council on suicide prevention. And, we were able to get a commitment for some funding to really look seriously at suicide and suicide prevention in the community. And so there was already a ministerial council on suicide prevention set up when I came there. Now, most people know that the most significant number of deaths from suicide occur in the age range below 35, mostly from about 15 to 35. And the Ministerial Council on Suicide Prevention, I don't think had anybody under 40 on it anyway, so it might have been 45. And so we decided that we needed to change that and establish a new, what I called action-orientated Ministerial Council on Suicide Prevention. And so a whole lot of names came forward and still not a single person under the age of about 50. And so then I went out and I spoke to the people at Youth Focus, who are an organisation that provides suicide prevention services, and I said, I want some young people. And they were very protective of the young people who had been through their services and started to put the word out that we wanted some younger people to come on board. And to be honest, from my point of view, I'd actually like young people to run it. But I haven't got I just haven't got the level of young people on that board that I'm looking for at this stage. But I got this fantastic young bloke that came on. He was 18 or 19 at the time. He's now a uni student. And immediately put him in a level of responsibility around marketing and promotion work. And it's changed the way that the Ministerial Council on Suicide Prevention, who've got amazing people on it, people like Sam Walsh from Rio Tinto is a member, or was until he's gone to London, and people like that. They're good people to have on there. I'm not saying that's not good, but I'm just saying having this young man come on and bringing these fresh ideas and a new approach to it and really being able to make that connection with the younger generation has been amazing.
So we need to mark that challenge of how do you connect when you're an organisation that wants to bring on younger people. How do you connect with young people that want to be on boards and have experiences that they can share? So let's talk about that a little later. Fantastic story though. It's really great to see a positive case study of when you actually include young people at that board level, what change can be made through to the culture of the organisation too. So Jan, you've been involved in, as we mentioned, a few boards. What's always been the age diversity on some of the boards that you've sat on?
Well, Alicia, I was thinking as the others were talking, probably not very good when I reflect about that. The first real board that I was on, when I think back, I was on the Social Work Association board in my 20s.
Yep.
Committee really, and I think we need to reflect the different kinds of boards. There's committees and there's working groups and there's steering groups and there's boards if you like. But the first real one was probably when I was in my mid-30s when James, our oldest son, was born, and a friend of mine came to visit me and my newborn with a bunch of flowers in one hand and a nomination form in the other, and said, "You'll have plenty of time now." And I joined the Lady Gowrie board and became the chairman of that fairly quickly. And from that, it's just been lurching from board to board, really. Different community boards, playgroup association when the kids were small, and then the international lottery board was an extraordinary experience in terms of diversity, because there were people from all around the world, a number of whom didn't speak English. So the management of a board process, when you're dealing with people with fundamentally different cultures, through an interpretation process, was a real learning experience for me in really being able to respect and work with different people. And I think about that in particular when I was chairman of the Asia Pacific Lottery Association, where the Japanese, there was a contingent of Japanese, they came with 4 people and 2 interpreters. And then most recently, my experience of the Hale board, where we do have some younger men, but probably not young enough, and certainly no young women on the, so a bit of a mission there. And the Save the Children Australia board is interesting in that we are contemplating some new appointments. But again, if I look around that table, and this is an organisation whose mission is to promote the well-being of children and young people. And I think probably the youngest around that table would be 50. So this whole conversation is real food for thought.
In
Just asked to speak up a bit further.
Oh, we've been asked to speak up a little bit. We'll make sure we keep directing our voice out to you, Emma. We actually found in our research that 6 current corporate boards or publicly listed boards, 62% of current board members are over the age of 50, with 29% of those 62% over the age of 60. And that's compared to 12% of board members who are under the age of 40. So when we're looking at board succession planning and just even a transfer of the knowledge and the legacy, the history of organisations as they stand right at the moment to younger generations, there's a huge opportunity for us to bring in younger people. But a few of you have mentioned being tapped on the shoulder to be put onto a board in the first place. So it's about, well, if we're going to our own networks, if the current boards are using their own networks to find new board members, you know, are they looking at their under 35s as part of their networks? And if they aren't, how can we start opening up those selection processes to at least consider younger board members? Let's, I'd just like to open it up. You know, you were talking about the benefit that you saw of having this younger person come onto your board, Helen. Matt, you know, you're a relatively young board member in terms of the age spectrum that we're talking about. What do you think different generations on a board brings to a not-for-profit?
I think diversity, and it's been mentioned in some of the material on the website, but diversity is by far the biggest thing that young people bring. I think it's identified, and I think, you know, from discussions that we've had, one of the big issues that has been recognised is the experience thing. I think that's why on a corporate you have a corporate which might be dealing in different regions, different legal jurisdictions and all the rest of it. Experience is really critical. Governance is really critical, not necessarily more so than not-for-profits or others, but I think that that experience is really important in those sorts of organisations. But the diversity that a young person can bring, they don't necessarily bring that experience, but you know, the connection that they've got with the community, the experience that they've got with technology, how to connect with people in their own generation, and the networks that they bring, which then in turn will bring new people through the board ranks, I think is really important. And I think, you know, we're going through in volunteering WA, we're going through a shift in board succession planning over the next 2 years, and we've started that process. And to be honest, all of the candidates that we've got, so we've got 3 positions that we need to fill, all of the candidates have come from within networks within the board, because I think the board needs to feel comfortable that whoever they bring on is going to fit. We're fortunate that we've got a very strong advocate for youth within the board, and we've got a couple of youth people that we're looking to put into that process, that selection process, young people. And I think for us, it's really about making, you know, you need to look at the organisation and look at how does the organisation interact with the community, what does the organisation need to do strategically, and fitting with that the people that will help the organisation to move forward.
Definitely. Helen, I know that you've always been a huge supporter of young women, particularly, you know, entering politics, so that there's that diversity on that council, at that level. What benefits do you see that brings to something like politics or to a not-for-profit organisation?
I think that whether we're talking about politics and parties, political parties, or not-for-profit organisations, or any sort of organisation, I think that they eventually evolve into a culture of maintaining the status quo. I think that people, or that organisations are, it's just feels natural that they kind of become comfortable, and then anything that challenges that comfort tends to be a bit difficult to move. And so I've seen it and in a political sense, I've seen it in the not-for-profit sector. And just an example about a not-for-profit sector, I was the CEO of a very small not-for-profit sector for 12 months prior to going into politics, and it really bothered me. I'd come from a serious job, a very senior level, a health executive level, which I had to leave. And once I had made my intentions about going to politics clear. So I worked for 12 months for a not-for-profit aged care service. And it really bothered me about the level of lack of innovation, lack of enthusiasm and fresh ideas that were coming. And sought about, as a CEO, to encourage the board to bring on some new young people. I noticed that 3 or 4 of the young people that you interviewed up there were occupational therapists.
Yes.
And so I approached a young occupational therapist myself and said, would you consider joining this board if I can persuade them to allow that to happen? And she did, which was really great. But unfortunately, from my point of view, it was too late. The board had become so inward and so restricted and unable to break out of that sort of culture that it did eventually fold, while other organisations doing similar work nearby were growing and expanding and looking at new. One of the things that I wanted the board to do, for example, was to take on mental health as part of its role of providing home-based services, but they didn't want to do that. It was too scary or something, and so it folded because it wasn't able to energise and bring on these new ideas. It was caught in this culture of comfort zone, and it stayed stuck, and it folded as a result of that.
And you can have examples of organisations like that in all different types of sectors, aged care included, that if we don't keep expanding and allowing that new fresh perspective, we have it really is a risk to the organisation, the future and the sustainability of our organisation. I think also, well, Jan, you're obviously dealing with a number of not-for-profit organisations, and in this area of innovation in community services, what sort of benefits do you think diversity brings to a board or to an organisation?
Oh, I think it's critical. But I think in thinking about diversity, for it to work, you can't just bring on the token one young person, or the token Asian person, or whatever it is the person that you. And I don't mean the word token pejoratively. I think even the most confident young person is going to be intimidated if they're the only person in the room under 30 and they're dealing with corporate people that are 60 plus. I think it's important for nomination committees, and I'm on nomination committees, to be given a brief by the board, and this has to be led by the chairman, or chairperson. If the chair isn't behind this, it's not going to work. Just as I'm recalling Faye Gale, when she was the Vice-Chancellor of UWA a number of years ago, insisted that when they were recruiting for positions at the university, that they not begin the interviews until they had produced some women to interview, and insisted that the search companies did that. And as a consequence, the proportion of women in senior roles at UWA increased considerably, and those women have done very well. I think we've got to do the same kind of thing here, is say, nominations committee, don't come back until you've produced a range of younger people's names, and to try to make sure that in the succession planning of the board that you're changing enough at the same time. Otherwise you get exactly what you've described, Helen. And you've got to have a chairman that's prepared to make clear that this board welcomes innovation, no ideas are bad ideas, and sets a culture where there can be conversation about new and different things. Like the cliche, the fish rots from the head. The CEO and the chairman have got to be together on this. It won't work if they're not.
I think what you're also saying is that we've got to become advocates for young people. We've got to seek them out and give them the same opportunity as anybody else that you would consider for a board position. We're not saying, you definitely have to put on a young person, but at least consider that. If you're looking for a particular skill set, as many boards do, how can you sort of open up that nominations to a number of different, pipelines, that come into your organisation. And if we can all become an advocate for a younger person and give them that mentorship, that belief that was asked for by, the young person, one of our young people, I think we have a better opportunity to start. Well, you said in your example, you got a lot more women into the organisation. Same with any type of diversity. This particular one is looking at age diversity, but we've also got lots of different diversities that we can consider. What do you? I can open it up to anybody. What do you think that diversity really does at a board level, though? Why? We've got the people around. We might have two young people if we're really good on an aged care board. What does that diversity bring in terms of real good governance, I suppose? Does anybody want to start with that one?
Well, I think if I could, I think one of the board's primary roles is to make decisions, and you want the board to make good decisions for the organisation. And to make a good decision as a group, you need that balance between you need respect amongst the members, but you need enough diversity and enough challenge within the board that you can get to a point where you make a good decision and you've explored all of the different options and looked at all of the different alternatives and risks and so forth. So for me, it's really about decision making. That's the big benefit. And I agree. I think it comes down to the culture of the board in that. I mean, it's one thing, the culture of the board, to get a young person onto the board, but then it's the culture of the board to really harness that diversity within the board. And it goes both ways. I think, the young people are viewed as energetic and new ideas, and often as one person said, often ideas that might have come up before that the experienced people might be able to challenge and say that won't work, but what about this? And it's really about having that conversation and being able to get to the root of whatever the decision is that you're trying to make.
So there's a real risk of groupthink, really, if all the people around the table are from sort of similar, ages, backgrounds. Helen?
Yes, I was just saying, yes, I think the real benefit is that they're prepared to challenge the status quo, because they don't come into the organisation with the or with that set mindset that's already partly stuck, perhaps, or set in a particular way. They actually come in because those sorts of mindsets occur after years of either participating, not necessarily on the board, but participating in the sector, the aged care sector, for example, having worked in it myself and then having sort of been around it for a while. You sort of adopt a mindset around things that perhaps need to be challenged. And so bringing a young person onto the board and giving them the support of having more than one person there will actually enable that challenging to take place much more effectively than having a whole group of people that have worked and been a part of the sector for year after year, as a lot of you people know that I have been. So I think it's really worthwhile to have young people coming on that can do that. And if I can just give one example, everybody knows there's an election on, and so people like myself are out there running campaigns and God knows what else. But, when you're an upper house member and you're in a safe position, you don't actually go out campaigning for yourself. So I've been given 3 so-called unwinnable seats to encourage and support people. Now, we decided that one of these at least, but in fact perhaps 2 of them, were winnable. And what we needed was and I coined the phrase, an audacious campaign. So what do we do to create an audacious campaign? The first thing we did was we put a 20-year-old as the campaign manager in place. And that just, like the candidate is over 50. The candidate doesn't get as much to say about what should or shouldn't happen. The 20-year-old is running the campaign. And I can tell you, I'm not going to tell you what seat it is or anything like that, but I can tell you it's now considered marginal.
Fantastic. I think we need a few audacious campaigns on aged care boards. I like that idea. Who wants to start an audacious campaign in their organisation? Jan, did you have any comments?
No, but it was just triggering for me. I think it was the Obama campaign the last time, where they got young people to make a YouTube clip to their grandparents in Florida, the kind of unwinnable seat, and using modern communication tools in a way that I imagine traditional campaign managers would not have. So I'm sorry, that was just a little flash for me about that. But I think about the number of young people that have joined our organisation. I'm not talking about boards now, I'm talking about younger staff. And what I say to them when I meet them, and I do try to meet all our new staff, is please be brave enough to tell us what are the stupid things that you can see us doing, because I've been doing this job for 21 years now, and I know that I'm too close to it. I'm used to it. This is how we do things around here, and I need people brave enough to say, that's a really weird way of doing something. What about if we tried this way? But it does require a new person in an organisation, and particularly a young person, to be supported, to be brave enough to speak out, and for the organisation to be willing to listen to it without defensiveness.
And I think, we have to acknowledge the 3 host organisations of this project, because I think they've been really brave in putting this forward in the aged care sector, because it's not something that really has been explored yet, and there's still some resistances that are still out there about this concept, even though other community many services sectors have taken on and embraced this issue. So, yeah, we all have to be a bit brave as part of this. So can I open it up to anybody in the audience? Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to pose to our panellists? Go for it. Mary Louise McDonald.
I think there's a bit of a challenge and on both sides of how we'd, promote younger people onto boards. And one is that we actually have some inbuilt problems. One is that it's usually unpaid for people to participate on a board. And as a CEO, I expect my board to meet at ridiculous times of day. They start at 7 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever. Most of them, to participate on a board, are in a job that they can leave and go and attend. They might not turn up for it till 11 o'clock in the morning because it started. And, it poses the challenge to me about how us as employers, if an employee comes along and says, I've been nominated onto a board of another not-for-profit or something like that, would I be able to assist that by allowing them to leave and still be paid and everything? Because we do a big ask of board members of time and money, and we expect that they can self-fund themselves being on it. So I'm curious about whether you have any ideas about that.
Well, maybe as an employer I can respond to that about what we're trying to do at Lottery West, in that we've got a commitment to give people time to volunteer or for professional development. And I've got a number of my staff, not necessarily young staff, but it would apply to younger staff, who are on boards, and I see that as part of their professional development and allow them reasonable time to do that and kind of record it as professional development. In a way, it's pretty cheap professional development. I'm not paying $5,000 for them to go and do an AIM course or whatever. They're learning on the job. And I think if the host organisation, if you like, of the young person, or indeed anybody who's on the board, is prepared to see it as part of their professional development and mentor them as well as the organisation in which they are volunteering, then I think that can really help. The other thing I'll throw into the mix to consider is a movement that's been recently started by David Flanagan of Atlas Metal or whatever it's called, which is promoted as Give One. And Give One can be $1, 1 hour, 1 day, 1% of your net profits. And essentially what that's doing is encouraging organisations to think about different ways that they can give to the community. And one of the ways that you can give as an employer is the time of your staff. And certainly I encourage that and support that. And we're trying to do a more structured volunteering program that could range from the gamut of, the one-day busy bee thing that some organisations do, to a commitment that staff members may have 2 hours a week or 3 hours a month to attend a board meeting in working time. So long as they're genuinely committed to it, and they can, I think they've got to also be able to describe what they're learning out of it.
Matt, did you have anything?
Yeah, I was just going to say as well, I think there's the Give One project's a really good example. I think that's part of the volunteering WA. It's a subcommittee, I guess, the Corporate Volunteer Council that started that. And what we're seeing there is that you start to get a bit of competitive, within businesses, a bit of competition about, okay, well, I'll give 10 hours, okay, I'm going to give, 2 days or whatever. And I think WA is really leading the pack in this sense, in terms of the corporate contribution to volunteering, whether that's the corporate organising the volunteers to go out, or whether it's to support them in volunteering on boards. And I think that in our paid jobs, that's something that we all need to be really fostering and looking at ways that we can do it, whether it be through flexible work hours. You know, my job, the guys are working all sorts of hours early in the morning, different time zones internationally. So we don't necessarily say you have to be at work between 9 and 5 and that's your period when you have to work. If you want to take off 3 or 4 hours in the middle of the day, we trust the employees that they can go, that, you know, they're doing what they need to do and that the job's getting done. So I think that it's really incumbent on all employers to support this, because without the volunteers on boards and volunteer activities, then the community stops.
Any other questions, Patrick?
Rising. Just the panel comment on the idea of it's not just a matter of getting board members saying that's it. So you all sort of hinted at it. I'd like to hear more. Once you get them on there, you've got to make them feel comfortable. You've got to make them stay. Can you comment on how you might do that? I mean, boards are very hierarchical, and that can be very intimidating for young people, and they don't quite know how to find their way around that. Any comments on that?
Have a go.
You go.
Well, I think a proper preparation for the orientation of a new board member is critical, which includes either written material or these days some kind of digital pack, but and a planned program of introduction to the organisation, of ensuring that that first board meeting that the chairman might go around the table and invite everybody to introduce themselves. I did a similar thing yesterday. We had a new consultative group begin at Lottery West, and I begin by we're not meeting yet, we're going to go around the table and we're going to tell something about ourselves, that kind of fairly obvious ice-breaking thing. And I recall a board, I won't name the board recently, that I went to, and for the first 2 meetings nobody introduced me. I just sat down, and I'm a very confident person, but it was a board of 14 or 15 people, and nobody even had really the common decency to say, "You're new, my name is." So I've made a bit of a song and dance about that on that board since then. Now, I know, look, I didn't feel very welcome, and we're going to be bringing some new people on, so let's change that. And I think finding a specific task for somebody to do pretty early in the piece, so they're working in a small group, and you know, the kind of board bonding sessions that so that there is more than just turn up at the meeting, you know, any apologies, here's the minutes, meeting closed. I think that there's a whole range of strategies, but you're absolutely right. For a group to work effectively, you have to set up the dynamic from the first meeting. Otherwise, it's really hard to change it. And again, I think that's a really important responsibility for the chairman to find a way. And the CEO, I think there's got to be tours of the organisation and introducing people and so forth. It's kind of common sense in a way, but it's not that common as I experienced.
I concur with everything you've said, Jan, and I'd just add another. It is to not create unrealistic expectations so that that person in the first 3 months starts to feel that they're not contributing or that they're not making a difference anywhere, or it's not really of any use going along. So I actually say to new employees, don't imagine that you're going to make a contribution to this organisation under 3 months, because it's going to take you at least that time to really understand the lay of the land, get the feel for how things work, get to know people, and then I have full faith in your ability to influence things down the track, but for the first 3 months you're probably not going to, so don't expect to. And give people time to really feel that they are able to sort of participate, I think is an important factor as well.
And I agree with Jan's comments. It really comes from the chair in terms of how the board operates, and you made the comment about being very hierarchical. but I tend to view boards as being, they should really be flat. I mean, the chairman might have a vote of veto or something, but really it's a team.
Yes.
And it's important that if you're bringing new people into the team, that they feel part of the team from day one. And that gets down to the work that you do prior to bringing them onto the board. So through the selection process, introducing them, making sure they're comfortable with who they're actually looking to join, and then when they come on, making sure that you've got a bit of structure around how you bring them on, introduction to the CEO, management team and the team, making sure that you've got the right governance structure as well, in terms of, to the point of making sure they know what all the board charters are, understanding all of the processes, management structures, all of that basic information that then feeds into them becoming effective as quickly as possible. Because, you know, you come in, if you work in one industry and you go on to a not-for-profit in another industry, simple things like acronyms. I mean, you get onto a board and you start reading the previous minutes and you're thinking, what's the A, B, C, D, you know, what does that mean? So it's simple things like that. And then it's encouraging in the board meeting to make sure that you take 5 minutes to stop and say, has anyone got any questions? Or, you know, specifically new people, are you feeling comfortable? Have you got any questions around? So it's really a cultural thing, I think. If the board is viewed as hierarchical, if you come on and you feel threatened, then that's something that you need to address first up.
And I'm glad that you brought that up, because we've actually got a whole Unconvention on that topic of how do we make multi-generational boards work. So we'll be looking at different case studies and different strategies that are hopefully a bit innovative and can provide you with some really good materials and strategies to take back to your boards. I also encourage you, and if we don't get to everybody's questions today, I also encourage you to put, you've all signed up to the website either today or before today, to add a blog post on the website. And if you don't know how to add a blog post, please come and see one of our Young Leaders Program participants. I'm sure they'll be able to show you today. Put your questions up as a blog post and put it out to the community as well. So we're trying to create a website that's an online resource as well, and put resources on there so we can collaborate between boards and really share what's working within our organisations and how we can sort of help each other grow our organisations. So that would be a really great topic to maybe start discussing before we get to that Unconvention. So we can find out as a project team what people are doing in that space and who we can showcase at that Unconvention. So we had another question along here, Rita.
It's on the area of how board members are recruited, and I have a long-held view that recruitment by people known to people already on the board is absolutely restrictive, and it also might not even be. Might be a selection process. It's just a tap on the shoulder, invite, and people aren't even asked really what level of commitment they're asked to give. So I think I still see that that's what happens a lot. And I guess perhaps it's a comment rather than a question, but that I think I hold a high value in actually saying that you use an external recruitment process, that you don't proceed, like you said, that you don't proceed until you have a pool and you run it as a selection process. So I'll just perhaps ask them to comment.
Yeah. And I think it's a good question. It's a good comment. People want to feel, I think one of you made the comment, people want to feel comfortable with the people that are you're bringing onto a board, and especially if somebody's from a different background to you, has a different sort of behavioural set, different thinking style, then that can cause a little anxiety on a board. But I think it's about, as what you were saying before, getting to know people and really where they're coming from, and seeing that diversity as something that is a strength and will actually build a stronger team, rather than something that, that person again, and they've always got that different opinion to everybody else. When we get comfortable with that status quo, we can tend to start seeing it like that, rather than a challenge for us all to become a learner and just experience where people are coming from. Does anybody have any comments on that?
I think the importance is when you're bringing, from my perspective, when you're bringing new board members onto a board, it has to be viewed as a selection process and a recruitment process. So it's not good enough that you just say, I've got a friend that I sit on another board with and he's a mate, so or she's a mate, so we'll bring them on. You need to get a pool, you need to look at what diversity you need to look at the skill set and go through that process, and each of those people need to know that they are involved in a recruitment process and that it's not a fait accompli that they might get on, but we're looking at what we need as a board in the interests of the organisation. But through that process as well, I think there's real benefits, because even if, well, clearly you're going to have a bigger pool than the number of board members that you need, those applicants who don't necessarily get on might fit into a subcommittee or something else, or you might view them as a co-opted member that you can bring in at some point. So I think the key is that it needs to be viewed as a recruitment process. Yep.
And I think taking seriously the structure of a nominations committee, not just, I don't know, the chairman or somebody else, oh, we've got a vacancy, I know someone. Absolutely agree with that. And the process of mapping the current board strengths on some kind of matrix, increasingly the boards that I'm on do that, and overlaying the expiry dates of terms of each member, and then really having a 4 or 5 year plan of how you're going to balance the skill set, including the age diversity and whatever other diversity that particular board might need, and taking that process seriously. And I think particularly not-for-profit boards, my observation is that they are still getting used to doing this and seeing it as being critical to their governance role. And even though you're not paid as a board member, your responsibilities are every bit as onerous and responsible as if you were being paid on a listed board. And if you can't take it that seriously and you can't make that commitment, then don't be on it. And I think the nominations committee needs to really work with people and make sure that they understand that this isn't just a nice thing to put on their CV. You're there to do something. And
I totally agree. I think you have a duty as a board member. You have a duty to the organisation. That's what people don't realise. A not-for-profit board member has the same personal liability that a for-profit organisation has, and if you're putting together a dysfunctional board, then your house and whatever else could be at risk if you don't have an effective board. So I think that for me is always a really good grounding point to think, okay, I might like this person, but are they necessarily the best person for the board?
And I think we've almost been scaring the participants of the Young Leaders program with the liabilities and the risks of being a board member, and they're saying, and we don't get paid. Okay.
Alyssa, can I just add something? Is that I actually think that there are a lot of people out in the community in all sorts of walks of life and at all different ages who would actually love the opportunity to be on a board and really contribute to it. And so Marita's question has made me think, I don't think I've ever seen a public advertisement. A few? For board members. But I'm thinking to myself, and the way that advertisement perhaps might be couched makes it look like they're only looking for the really high flyer executive type person or whatever to be on the board. But I actually think that across the community there's lots of people who would just love to be a part of a really dynamic board, but they imagine they're not the people that are being sought. And so the wording or the approach that's used, I think, is going to make such a difference to try and encourage those people to recognise that they are the exact people that they're looking for.
And I'm sure that that's the case for young people in aged care as well. But we've got 20 really, excited participants of our program, and we had even more applications than we had places for. So to say that there's not the young people out there who are willing to not only put their hand up but make that commitment, and they've actually committed to, you know, a 4-month program where they meet once a week voluntarily after work, give weekends to actually grow their knowledge around governance, around the sector, around leadership, how they work with other generations. So there are committed people out there.
Absolutely,
so it's about bringing those two different groups together. I know Cooten had a question.
I just wanted to ask, and I think perhaps maybe I'm jumping in Unconvention here or not, but I was just really interested to hear from the panel, how do boards typically think about using young people when they recruit them? In my experience, I've been recruited on boards and various committees, and you kind of get the idea that you're Mr. Fresh Ideas. And when it comes to actually making real decisions, it's kind of like, okay, this is not a fresh idea, this is a decision, so we're going to skip you a little bit and then we're going to go to the real decision makers. So how do you make young people understand why they're on the board, and how do you utilize young people on boards?
I think that's a really nice perspective to share, because it can be something, that we're maybe overlooked for other things, but are brought on because of our energy or, you know, passion, but actually forget, you know, the real experience, the actual experience that a younger board member can bring, even though we're always told that we lack experience. Does anybody have any suggestions or comments on that?
I think, sorry.
I'm just reflecting again on my experience of boards, and maybe the expectations of a young person, and maybe the expectations of a board in suddenly seeing the light and deciding, oh, we need these young people with fresh ideas. The fact of the matter is, when I reflect, is that the vast majority of the board's work is pretty straightforward. It's you know, managing, making sure the finances are right, the risk management is right. So the process of contributing to the strategic plan, I think, is where fresh ideas come in. But if you start with the expectation that at every board meeting there's going to be a fresh idea and I'm going to get to contribute to it, there'll be a mismatch, because board meetings sometimes have got to be fairly pedestrian. No, that's the truth. So finding the place for the using of the fresh ideas, and I'm thinking about the most recent strategic planning exercise we did at Hale, where we had a fantastic young man as a facilitator, futurist. That was the place for the fresh ideas. But I've just come from a meeting today where we're taking some important, what could be seen as boring decisions, but critical decisions about finances. No, it's not a fresh idea, it's running this significant business. So I think it's the younger people and the board understanding the place for innovation around a board table, and not get overexcited, if you like, about having young people on the board because they're going to bring these fantastic new ideas. There's just some real grunt work that has to be done on the board, and whether you're 25 or 60, you've got to do it.
Yep. Any other comments?
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Jan said. I think the risk is, if you're every board meeting you're looking for fresh ideas, then management in the organisation's not going to know which way they're going. So, you know, you go through a strategic planning process, and then you test in the board meeting, you really test how the business is going against the strategy where the new ideas are being generated. So I agree, a lot of it is very pedestrian.
I think we have time for one more question. Do you, Drew?
Thank you. Thanks, Jan, for bringing that up. I don't think it matters how old you are, but the fundamental thing for me for being on a board is that you actually understand what your role is. And I think most of us come from, you know, have vast experience in operational areas, and we get onto boards and under pressure revert to that operational position, which is not the role of the board. So I think in bringing young people onto boards, we must make sure that they understand what the role is. And we have a bit of a saying in our organisation that nobody has a licence on good ideas. So I wouldn't want all the young people to feel they had to do that. But I do chair a board where we have a young person on the board, and she will often say, I'm going to give you the young person's view, which does challenge us all and is an absolute bonus to our board. So yeah, so that's good. But I think that role definition is really important, and I'm sure it will be part of the training.
Definitely.
Yes,
And I think it's important not to stereotype any generation, just because to associate young people with fresh ideas. There's many young people who want experience in the financial management of an organisation, who can provide skills and experience in that area too. So I think again it's just assessing people as an individual and the contribution that they can make, whatever their experience is.